March 12, 1944. A German armored car speeds through fog at 15 miles per hour. Corporal Jimmy Dalton watches from a muddy ditch, hands wrapped around barbed wire his commanders explicitly forbade him from using. In 90 seconds, that wire will flip an armored vehicle and change warfare forever. But first, it will nearly get him court-martialed. Hit subscribe. This is the story they never taught you. To understand why Dalton risked everything, you need to understand what was killing his friends. February 1944. The 34th Infantry Division is grinding up the Italian peninsula like a millstone through grain. Every village contested, every ridge fortified, every river crossing paid for in blood. But what's killing more Americans than direct combat is something faster, quieter, and impossible to stop. German reconnaissance. Picture this. Dawn breaks over the Leary Valley. Fog hangs thick between the mountains. You're in your foxhole, exhausted from another sleepless night, trying to eat cold rations from a tin. Then you hear it. That distinctive whine of a German straight-six engine, getting closer. The Sd.Kfz 222 emerges from the mist like a mechanical predator. Four-wheeled, open-topped, armed with a 20mm autocannon and an MG-34 machine gun. Fast enough to escape before you can react. Armored enough that your rifle rounds spark off its hull like fireworks. The commander stands in the open hatch, scanning with binoculars. The gunner traverses the cannon, looking for targets. You know what happens next? They'll spot your position. Mark it on their map. Radio the coordinates. And 12 hours later, German artillery will rain down on this exact spot, killing everyone who stayed. American doctrine says to engage reconnaissance vehicles with anti-tank rifles, bazookas, or mines. There's just one problem. Nobody has any. The 34th Infantry Division has 9 bazookas for the entire division. 9 anti-tank rifles were phased out before the Italian campaign even started. Mines are reserved for static defensive positions, not daily patrols through mountain terrain. So, soldiers die. They die watching scout cars map their positions. They die knowing the artillery is coming. They die because the approved methods require equipment that simply doesn't exist. Private First Class Eddie Kowalski learned this on February 18, 1944. He's 20 years old. From Pittsburgh. A machinist's son who enlisted on the same day as Jimmy Dalton rode the same transport ship to North Africa, endured the same brutal march up Italy. At dawn, a 222 rolls past his foxhole. Kowalski does exactly what he's been trained to do. He fires his M1 Garand. The rounds hit the armor. They spark, they ricochet. They do absolutely nothing. The scout car's MG-34 pivots. Finds Kowalski. 3 rounds hit his chest before he can take cover. He dies in that foxhole, still holding his rifle, while the scout car drives away untouched. Dalton hears about it 2 hours later. Kowalski had been showing him pictures of his kid sister the night before, talking about the motorcycle he wanted to buy when he got home, making plans for a future that would never happen. 5 days later, it happens again. Sergeant Mike Brennan, 4 years old, from Brooklyn. 4 sisters waiting for him at home tries to stop a 222 with a grenade. He throws it from 30 yards, his only option. It misses. The autocannon doesn't. Brennan had taught Dalton how to set up a proper fighting position, how to read terrain, how to keep your feet dry in Italian mud so trenchfoot doesn't kill you before the Germans do. Now he's dead because a scout car drove through at dawn and nobody could stop it. Then Corporal Luis Vargas on March 4th. El Paso. Always shared his cigarettes, even when he only had 3 left. Spoke better Spanish than English. A 222 drives right through the company's position at dusk. Machine gun blazing. Vargas runs for cover. The autocannon catches him mid-stride. The medic tries everything. Pressure, bandages, plasma. Nothing stops the bleeding. By early March 1944, the 34th Infantry Division has lost 47 men to reconnaissance vehicles in 6 weeks. Not 2 major battles, not 2 coordinated assaults. Just scout cars doing their job while Americans have no answer. Dalton watches each death, knows most of the names, feels each one like a physical blow. And something inside him starts to crack. Ever watch someone die knowing you could have prevented it? March 5, 1944. Captain Morrison holds a meeting in a barn that smells like gunpowder and wet wool. 20 exhausted soldiers stand in a semicircle. Morrison's uniform is cleaner than theirs. He arrived from division headquarters that morning with fresh orders and empty promises. Higher command is aware of the reconnaissance problem, Morrison says, reading from a memo. New bazooka shipments are expected within the month. Until then, maintain defensive posture. Conserve anti-tank assets. Follow engagement protocols. Dalton stands in the back. He's been thinking about this problem for weeks. Growing up in Gary, Indiana, his father worked 15-hour shifts at the U.S. steel blast furnaces. The family lived in a 2-room apartment with 6 kids. Jimmy, the middle child, spent his afternoons at the rail yards instead of school. The rail yards taught him systems thinking, how one loose coupling pin could derail 6 freight cars, how a frayed brake cable could kill a brakeman, how you learned to spot problems before they became disasters and fix them with wire, rope, and creativity, because the company sure as hell wasn't buying new equipment. At 17, he was apprenticing as a switchman. The work was dangerous, underpaid, brutal. But it taught him something the Army never did. When you can't get new equipment, you improvise with what you have. Now, staring at Morrison explaining why they needed to wait for bazookas that would probably never arrive, Dalton sees the problem clearly. The scout cars always use the same roads. They move fast, but predictably. And they have one critical vulnerability nobody's exploiting. Their wheels, sir, Dalton says, voice cutting through the barn's silence. What if we rigged wire across the roads, at low height, taut enough to catch the axles? Morrison looks at him like he suggested using slingshots against Tiger tanks. Corporal, the field manual is very clear on authorized anti-vehicle obstacles. Wire entanglements are defensive measures requiring specific positioning and engineering support. They're not improvised booby traps. But sir, the answer is no. We re-knot setting random tripwires that could injure our own men or violate international warfare conventions. Morrison's tone makes it clear the discussion is over. Dismissed. The meeting breaks up. Soldiers file out, shoulders slumped, knowing nothing will change. But Dalton doesn't forget. Can't. Because that afternoon, 2 more men die. Privates Chen and Harrison. Chen is a radio operator from San Francisco, always humming jazz tunes while he worked. Harrison is from Oklahoma, constantly talking about his family's farm, the wheat fields he missed. A 222 rolls through at 4 p.m. They're both in the open, moving between positions. The scout car's gunner sees them. MG-34 chatters. Both men go down. That night, March 10, 1944, Jimmy Dalton makes his decision. He's going to break the rules, risk court-martial, possibly endanger his own men. Because following regulations has killed 49 Americans in 6 weeks. And he's done watching his friends die. Midnight, March 10, 1944. The company is dug in along the Rapido River Valley, 2 miles south of Casino. German positions are visible on the ridgeline to the north, occasional muzzle flashes. Distant artillery rumbling like thunder that never stops. Dalton waits until the camp is quiet, till the officers are asleep and the sentries are focused on the German lines, not on what's behind them. He grabs a coil of barbed wire from the supply dump. 30 feet. Rusted but strong, nobody will miss it. He takes 2 entrenching tools, the standard issue folding shovels every soldier carries. Then he moves out alone. No permission, no backup, no witnesses. The March night is cold enough that his breath mists in the darkness. Mud sucks at his boots with every step, threatening to pull them off. He can hear artillery to the north, the constant background noise of war that you learn to ignore until a shell lands close enough to remind you it's real. The road the scout cars use runs parallel to American lines about 400 yards out. It's a dirt track, barely wide enough for vehicles, squeezed between oak trees whose branches create a natural canopy. Perfect cover for reconnaissance. Perfect place for a trap. Dalton finds a spot where the road narrows between two thick oak trunks. Good visibility from the American lines. Limited visibility from the German side until you're right on top of it. He drives the first shovel into the ground on the left side of the road. The blade sinks 6 inches into mud before hitting harder soil. Not deep enough. If a two-tone vehicle hits the wire at speed, that shovel will rip out like a tent stake in a hurricane. He uses a rock to hammer it deeper. 12 inches. Stable, he tests it with his full body weight, pulling hard. It holds. The second shovel goes in on the right side. 18 feet across. He measures by pacing 3 steps, each step roughly 6 feet. Then comes the critical part. The wire. He wraps it around the first shovel's handle, 3 loops, tight as he can make them. His hands are slick with mud and rust. The wire bites into his palms. He feels blood mixing with cold rainwater. He stretches the wire across the road at exactly 14 inches off the ground. Not ankle height, where it might trip a walking patrol. Not waist height, where it might catch the hood. Axle height. He'd measured a destroyed 222 2 weeks ago during a patrol. The front axle sits between 13 and 15 inches, depending on load and terrain. If the wire catches the axle at speed, the wheel locks, but momentum continues. The vehicle's own weight and velocity become weapons against itself. He wraps the wire around the second shovel, 3 loops again, then tests the tension. Too loose and it snaps harmlessly. Too tight and it breaks before the car hits. He pulls the wire taut. It hums when he plucks it, vibrating like a guitar string. The shovels hold. The whole setup takes 23 minutes. When he's done, Dalton sits in the ditch, catching his breath, watching the road. His heart is hammering. Not from exertion, from fear of what he's just done. If a patrol comes now, he'll have to run. If an officer finds out, court-martial is certain. If it fails, men will die anyway, and he'll have nothing to show for the risk. But if it works, he buries the wire under a thin layer of mud. Not enough to weaken it, just enough to make it invisible in low light. The rusted shovels blend into the landscape, look like abandoned equipment unless you're staring right at them. And by the time someone notices, it will be too late. Dalton crawls back to American lines at 1:15 a.m. He doesn't tell anyone. He can't. Morrison made the orders clear. He lies in his foxhole as dawn approaches, hands still bleeding from the wire, and waits. The trap is set. Now comes the hardest part, waiting to see if it works or if he's just sentenced himself to military prison for nothing. March 12, 1944, 6:43 a.m. Dalton is on watch, eating cold rations from a tin. The morning fog is thick enough that he can barely see 50 yards. Then he hears it, that distinctive whine. The German straight-six engine that's haunted his nightmares for 6 weeks. Sd.Kfz 222. Coming from the north, he doesn't move, doesn't call out. Nobody else has heard it yet. The fog muffles sound, makes direction impossible to pinpoint. The scout car emerges from the mist at 600 yards. Gray paint scheme. Commander's hatch open. Moving at what Dalton estimates is 15 miles per hour. Routine patrol. They're not expecting contact. 500 yards, Dalton can see the commander now. Standing in the hatch, scanning with binoculars. The gunner traverses the 20mm cannon, probably bored, looking for targets that aren't there. 400 yards. The car stays on the road. Perfect. 300 yards. Dalton's hands start shaking. This either works or it doesn't. If it doesn't, the scout car finds them and calls in artillery. If it does, he's violated direct orders and there will be consequences. He thinks about Kowalski, Brennan, Vargas, Chen, Harrison. The list is too long. 200 yards. The car accelerates slightly. The driver probably wants to clear the area quickly. Standard reconnaissance procedure. 100 yards. Dalton can see the front wheels clearly now. Mud-caked, spinning fast. 50 yards from the wire. He holds his breath. The wire catches the front right wheel at 6:47 a.m. What happens next occurs in pieces, like photographs developing in his mind. The wheel locks instantly. The axle seizes. But the vehicle weighs 2 tons and it's moving at 22 feet per second. Physics takes over. The locked wheel becomes a pivot point. The entire vehicle's momentum forces it forward while the anchor point holds it back. The nose goes down. The rear lifts. The commander has maybe half a second to realize what's happening before the scout car goes vertical. It rolls once. Metal screaming. Glass shattering. Twice, the commander is thrown clear, body tumbling through space. 3 times. The vehicle completes the rotation and slams upside down. Engines still roaring. Wheels spinning uselessly in the air. Smoke pours from the engine compartment. And Dalton is already running. Covering fire. He yells, grabbing his M1. Other soldiers pour out of foxholes. Rifles up, not entirely sure what just happened, but responding to the urgency in Dalton's voice. The scout car's engine is still running. Wheels spinning. Smoke getting thicker. The commander is dead, thrown clear during the second roll, his neck broken on impact. The gunner is trapped under the turret, unconscious, bleeding from a head wound. The driver is crawling out through the shattered windscreen, dazed, disoriented, moving on instinct. Dalton reaches him first. The German is maybe 22, blonde hair matted with blood. He looks up at Dalton and raises his hands, universal language of surrender. No fight left in him. Dalton pulls him clear, passes him to Private Morrison, no relation to the captain, then does something that will save him from questions. He unwraps the wire from the front axle, fast, before anyone can see clearly what actually stopped the car. The wire is still attached to the shovels, which have been ripped from the ground and dragged 20 feet down the road. But the wire held. Dalton coils it quickly, shoves it deep in his pack, and returns to the wreckage. By the time Captain Morrison arrives 6 minutes later, there's no obvious explanation for what happened. Morrison walks around the overturned scout car. He's looking for mine craters, bazooka impact marks, something that makes sense according to approved anti-tank methods. He finds nothing. The vehicle is intact except for roll damage. No penetrations, no blast patterns. Just one very destroyed scout car that apparently flipped itself. Corporal Morrison says, staring at Dalton. Scout cars don't just flip. Yes, sir. Morrison looks at the road, at the tracks. At the impossible angle of the wreck, he knows something is wrong with this picture. But the German is captured. The threat is neutralized. Nobody is dead on the American side. He makes a decision. Get this vehicle documented. Photographs, full report. Yes, sir. Morrison walks away, still troubled, but willing to accept the inexplicable win. By noon, every soldier in the company knows something strange happened. Scout cars don't flip themselves, but Dalton isn't talking. And nobody else saw what actually happened in those crucial seconds. The secret stays buried. Until Private Morrison, the one who took the German prisoner, finds Dalton cleaning his rifle at 2 p.m. What really happened out there, Jimmy? Dalton doesn't look up, keeps running the cleaning rod through the barrel. Car flipped. Jimmy, Morrison sits down next to him. I saw a wire in your pack. Saw those shovels on the road. Dalton stops cleaning. He looks at Morrison for a long moment. They'd been in basic training together. Both from Gary, Indiana. Morrison from the south side, Dalton from the rail yards. They'd known each other since they were kids, playing stickball in streets that smelled like steel furnaces. If anyone would understand, it's Morrison. "You didn't see anything?" Dalton says quietly. Morrison leans closer. "If I did see something hypothetically, would it work again?" "Yes. Can you teach me?" That night, after dark, Dalton shows Morrison how to set the wire. 2 shovels, 30 feet of barbed wire, exact height, proper tension. Strategic placement. Morrison does it himself while Dalton watches, correcting hand positions and testing the final setup. By March 15th, 6 soldiers know the method. Dalton didn't tell them directly. Morrison told one. That soldier told another. Word spreads through the underground network that exists in every military unit, the whispered conversations that happen after officers go to sleep. The practical knowledge that flows soldier to soldier regardless of rank or regulation. Private Jackson rigs a wire on the road to San Pietro. Private O'Malley sets one near the Gargano River. Corporal Williams puts one across a trail Germans use for night patrols. None of them have permission. None of them document it. They just do it. Because men are dying and the approved methods require equipment nobody has. The second 222 hits Jackson's wire on March 18th. Same result. Vehicle flips. Commander killed. Crew injured. Jackson is smart enough to remove the wire before officers arrive for investigation. The third car hits O'Malley's trap on March 21st. This one doesn't flip, completely catches the wire at lower speed, but crashes hard enough to disable the vehicle. The crew abandons it and retreats on foot. By March 25th, German reconnaissance in the 34th Division sector has dropped by 60%. The 222s are still probing, but they're moving slower, taking different routes, showing unusual caution. Something has changed in the American sector. The Germans don't know what. But they're losing scout cars in circumstances that make no tactical sense. Lieutenant Klaus Richter of the 29th Panzer Grenadier Division notices it first. Richter commands a reconnaissance platoon 3 Sd.Kfz 222s, experienced crews operating in the casino sector since January. He knows these roads, knows American positions, knows patrol patterns. And in 2 weeks, he's lost 3 scout cars in incidents that defy explanation. March 27th, he examines the wreckage of Vehicle 237 personally. The car flipped on the road to Cervaro. A commander dead. Gunner wounded. Driver claims the vehicle suddenly stopped at full speed, then rolled. Richter crawls under the wreckage with a flashlight. The front axle is bent, but intact. No mine damage. No explosive residue. But there are marks on the wheel housing. Deep scrapes, suggesting something caught the axle at high speed. Something thin. Something strong. He finds a fragment embedded in the wheel well. Rusted barbed wire. Standard issue. Could be German or American. But the placement was deliberate, strung across the road at precisely the right height to catch a scout car's front axle. Someone rigged a trap. Richter reports his findings to Division Intelligence on March 29th. The report is met with skepticism. Barbed wire wouldn't stop a 2-ton armored vehicle. The physics don't work. The Americans don't have anti-vehicle obstacle training for improvised traps. But Richter insists. 3 cars destroyed. Same pattern. Same unexplained flips. Till you consider wire. By early April, German reconnaissance units around Casino have standing orders to scan roads for wire obstacles before proceeding. Scout cars move at half speed. Commanders dismount to inspect suspicious terrain. The cautious approach cuts their effectiveness by 40%. Reconnaissance patrols drop. Artillery called in by scouts drops by half. American casualties from scout car attacks essentially stop. And officially, according to U.S. Army records, nobody knows why. Captain Morrison figures it out on April 3, 1944. He's inspecting defensive positions when he finds Private Williams setting up a wire across a logging road. Same setup Dalton pioneered. 2 shovels, barbed wire at axle height. Williams freezes when he sees the captain. Morrison walks over, examines the wire, tests the tension himself. "Where'd you learn this?" Williams says nothing. "That's an order, Private." "Corporal Dalton, sir." Morrison is quiet for a long moment. Then he takes out his notebook and starts sketching. Measurements, angles, wire gauge, installation procedure. He has Williams demonstrate the full process while he watches and takes detailed notes. "How many have you set up?" "4, sir." "Results?" "1 hit." "Scout car flipped. German crew captured." Morrison closes his notebook. He looks down the empty road. Artillery rumbles in the distance. The war continues. And here's a method that works. Requires no special equipment. Any soldier can implement it. It's saving lives. "Show me 2 more setups before dark. Different terrain. I want to see placement options." Williams blinks, not sure he heard correctly. "Sir?" "That's an order, Private." By April 10th, Morrison has documented 17 wire installations across the company's sector. He interviews the soldiers who set them up. Records results, calculates success rates. 87% of scout cars that hit the wires are disabled. 0 friendly casualties. Total material cost, 30 feet of barbed wire and 2 shovels. Equipment already in the supply chain. He writes a 3-page report. Technical specifications. Tactical recommendations. Statistical validation. He sends it up to battalion on April 12th. The response comes back April 19th. Method unauthorized. Discontinue immediately. Violates field manual regulations regarding obstacle placement and fails to meet engineering safety. Standards. Morrison reads the response twice. Then he files it in a drawer and does absolutely nothing. The tripwires stay up. The casualty rate stays down. And officially, nothing is happening. But someone at division staff is noticing the numbers. The statistics tell a story battalion can't ignore forever. February 1944. Before the tripwires, the 34th Infantry Division lost 47 men to reconnaissance vehicle attacks. March 1944. After the tripwires spread, 12 dead. April 1944. 3 dead. Reconnaissance vehicle sightings in division sector. February, 147. March, 89. April, 34 artillery strikes called in by German reconnaissance. February, 203. March, 127. April, 58. Someone in division staff pulls the casualty reports. Colonel Anderson, the division intelligence officer, sees the pattern immediately. He sends investigators to front lines in late April. They find the tripwires within 2 days. Anderson's response is pragmatic. He can't officially approve a method that violates doctrine, but he can't ignore results that save hundreds of lives. His compromise is elegant in its simplicity. He does nothing. No orders to stop. No orders to continue. Just a memo that goes nowhere and a blind eye turned toward the front. The tripwires remain. May 1944. The 34th Infantry Division is pulled off the line for rest and refit. Dalton's company is sent to a rear area near Naples. Real beds, hot food, no scout cars. On May 23rd, Dalton is called to division headquarters. He reports in his cleanest uniform, which still looks like it's been through a war because it has. Colonel Anderson meets him in a tent office. "Corporal Dalton, I've read the reports about your wire method, sir. I'm not here to punish you. I'm here to ask you to train others." Dalton doesn't expect that. Anderson explains, "The 36th Infantry Division is taking over the 34th sector. They need to know how to deal with reconnaissance. The official anti-tank school is 3 weeks long and requires equipment the Army doesn't have." Dalton's method takes 1 night and materials from the supply dump. "I can't make it official," Anderson says. but I can assign you to a training detail. You teach the method to scout and sniper teams. We'll call it improvised obstacle placement in the paperwork. Nobody needs to know exactly what that means. Dalton spends 2 weeks in June 1944 teaching 60 soldiers. Placement, tension, concealment, removal, every detail he learned through trial and error. The soldiers are skeptical initially. Wire won't stop armor. But Dalton shows them photographs of flipped scout cars, gives them casualty statistics. They learn. By July, the method spreads to 3 divisions. By August, it's in use across the Italian front. Never officially documented. Never in training manuals. Just whispered knowledge passing from unit to unit, soldier to soldier. Conservative estimates credit Dalton's tripwire method with destroying or disabling 43 German reconnaissance vehicles between March and August 1944. Those vehicles would have called in hundreds of artillery strikes. Those strikes would have killed hundreds of soldiers. Lives saved, 300 to 400, minimum. The official documentation attributes the decline to improved defensive awareness and enhanced anti-tank capabilities. Dalton's name appears in no reports. His innovation receives no commendation. The Army prefers it that way. Admitting a corporal solved a problem that stumped the engineering corps is bad for institutional pride. James Dalton survives the war. He's discharged November 1945 with the rank of sergeant and a combat infantryman badge. No medals for the tripwires. No recognition beyond what fellow soldiers give him, which is all he wanted anyway. He goes back to Gary, Indiana. U.S. Steel hires him as a switchman in January 1946. Same rail yards he'd worked before the war. Same couplers and cables. He marries Dorothy from East Chicago. They have 3 kids. He doesn't talk much about Italy. When asked, he says he did his job and came home. Once a year, March 12th, he receives phone calls from Morrison, Williams, and Jackson. They talk for a few minutes. Remember Chen, Brennan, Vargas? Remember the fog and the scout cars and the wire? In 1963, a military historian researching German reconnaissance losses in Italy finds references to an unexplained increase in vehicle rollovers in early 1944. The pattern is specific to the casino sector. The historian interviews veterans, finds Dalton through Morrison. Dalton agrees to one interview. He explains the method, provides dates and details, then asks that his name not be used in publication. The historian respects the request. The article published in 1965 attributes the innovation to unidentified NCOs in the 34th Infantry Division. James Dalton dies in 1987 at age 63. Heart attack in his living room. His obituary in the Gary Post-Tribune mentions he served in World War II and worked 41 years for U.S. Steel. It doesn't mention tripwires, scout cars, lives saved. Dorothy knows he did something important in Italy, but she never knows exactly what. The method lives longer than the man. Post-war analysis by Army engineers validates the concept. Wire obstacles at axle height are integrated into official doctrine in 1949. As an approved method for disabling light reconnaissance vehicles, the training manual credits field observations from the Italian campaign. Modern military forces still teach variations. The principle hasn't changed. Sometimes the simplest solution is best. And sometimes soldiers in the mud know more than officers in headquarters. That's how innovation actually happens in war. Not through committees, not through engineering studies. Through corporals who can't watch friends die anymore. Through switchmen who learned to solve problems with wire and shovels because nobody was giving them anything better. Through men who risked punishment to save lives and never asked for credit. The wire is still taught. The method is still used. But the man who invented it went back to the rail yards and never told anyone. Sometimes that's exactly right. If this story moved you, subscribe to keep these histories alive. Comment where you're watching from. These stories need to be told.